Earth Day is coming up, so I thought, what a better way to celebrate than to share 24 earthy toned eyeshadow palettes. Hello, my gorgeous ones. Welcome to Alicia Budget Beauty. My name is Alicia. Here on my channel, I love all things affordable fashion and beauty. I do hauls, tutorials, reviews, palette rundowns, all sorts of fun stuff. So if that sounds good to you, please subscribe, stick around, be a friend. All right, you guys, very excited for this video today. One, because it has been on my mind for several months to do this video. And two, I am also collaborating with one of my Instagram and YouTube besties, Brittany from Menagerie Beauty. She is such a little ray of sunshine. She's adorable. She does tons of indie eyeshadow palettes and also getting into fragrances and sharing those as well. She's like a little sister kind of to me. So I don't remember if it was that we were talking or maybe on her video. I can't remember. She said something about she was about to film like earthy palettes, and I said, wait, I've had this plan to do earthy palettes for Earth Day. Let's do a collab. And she agreed, and here we are. So you guys be sure, go subscribe to her if you are not, follow her on Instagram, and go watch and see what earthy palettes she picked out. I'm sure there'll be a few crossovers in here. We both have a pretty extensive collection, but I have 24, you guys, and I decided to just pull really them all out because all of these are good. I'm not ranking these. It would be, it would be too hard. Like all of these are really, really great. Plus it's just, I don't know, like they're all not exact color stories, but it would just be hard to rank these. So I do have 24 and they are some really, really good palettes. So if you want to see these, keep on watching. All right, so first up, let's go ahead and start with what is on my eyes today. So here is this beautiful look. I'm loving it. I think it's so pretty. And we have the Flying Fiddles palette by Adept. Now, I will go ahead and tell you guys how I kind of differentiated between earthy and neutral because there can be somewhat of a crossover there. In order for it to be earthy for me, I look for greens that are more earth toned greens, things you see in nature. I look for browns. I look for things that look like dirt. And then also it could be like ocean, moss, you know, sky even, like that is what I'm looking at. So mainly greens, blues, browns that look earthy. I left out neutrals that don't have any greens at all, or neutrals that are more just like smoky, but there's no green tones in there, no blue tones. So that's kind of my qualifiers. But Flying Fiddles, this is actually what inspired this whole video for me. Because when this first came out, everyone was calling it a neutral palette. When I did my YouTube video on this and started playing with it, I was like, this is an earthy palette. I wouldn't call this a neutral, like it has neutrals in it, but this is just more of an earthy palette to me. And in that video, I remember saying like, maybe I'll do like earthy palettes for Earth Day. So whenever this came out, that's when I had this idea. And you guys, this palette is just, it is such a good palette. It would be really, really hard for me right now to choose my favorite of my Adepts. I'm currently still testing out the Cyborg palette. Didn't have a YouTube on it, but I've used it 4 or 5 times now. I have one other look I really want to do with it. And then I may have to force myself to rank, but this is definitely one of my favorites because this is one of the most wearable. It may not be the one that just when you have the look, you're like, whoa, what is on your eyes? But like this formula is beautiful. I do have on today just 2 of the mattes. I have Tan Toffee Rose, which is more mauve toned on me than it is neutral, to be honest. And then I have Sahara, this brown, to deepen up the outer portion and also under the eyes. Then on the lids, let's see, I have to look down because if I look at it at an angle, it's got those shifts and I'm like, wait, which one did I use here? So I have Viola Bronze, Meadow Foam, and let's see, what else did I use? I think it was Rest Bunny. Is that what I used? No, I think I used Erasima, and then Yellow Bronwyn. So I have 4 shimmers on the eyes and then just 2 mattes. And you guys, like this is, chef's kit, like Adept just keeps killing it for me. I get spoiled every time I use Adept again, or sometimes I wonder why I even mess with some other formulas because this is so good. But if you have this perfect earthy palette, if you don't, I can't remember. I'll say, I don't remember if this is available anymore or not, or sold out or coming back, but this is an excellent, excellent palette. All right, next up I have a Menagerie Cosmetics palette. This is Killer Purr. I think this is a very unique color story and a very unique earthy tones palette. And when I opened it up, I was like, wait, is that? I was like, yes, it is. I think this is like, when it encompasses everything, because like I said, if you want to also include sky and water, and then your earthy tones as well of the ground, the green of the grass and the trees, like this is earthy all in one palette. The only thing that's maybe an outlier a little bit is this pinky shade here, but it actually has a gold, it's like a duochrome, so it reflects pink and gold. I definitely think that it counts. And I really loved my looks with this palette. I haven't purchased any recently from Menagerie. I have the ink palette, I have this one of course, and then I have some singles because I don't love another color story as much as I love this one. Like this is one of, I think, the prettiest color stories, just period. Really, really great quality. I love the cover art. I mainly at first was attracted to it because of the lion, because my middle son he's a little lion. That's what he is. He's 8, he's got lion loveys. His hair looks like a lion. So that's what first attracted me, but this palette is so, so good. All right, next up we have one of the palettes from the collection that ruined me pretty much forever for Oden's eye. That is the Red Dragon palette. The reason why I say that it ruined me is I haven't liked anything that they put out as much as I liked this collection. Therefore, I haven't purchased really anything since. I have Soulmane 2. I cannot remember which came out first. I love that palette as well, but anything else has just been like meh. And this palette is like earthy with that like volcano earth to it. You've got the fiery orange red, you've got the rust, you've got like the molten lava starts to harden, and then you've also got the green and a little bit of like a rose gold in here. This palette, I think this color story is so pretty. It's kind of grungy, fiery, volcano earthy all in one. Okay, next up I have two from Profusion, the tin pans that I wax on and on about all the time. I always am like, these are so good for $5. So we have the Emeralds palette. This palette pops up a lot for me. It was in my greens. I pull it out quite a bit. These pans are also pretty large, so these palettes could last a really long time. I've got a lot of palettes, so all my palettes last a really long time, but I have used this often and it's kind of hard to tell. But I love this quality. And then we also have the Meadow, so let me go ahead and open that one up, show them at the same time. At first I wasn't gonna pull out Meadow, and then I thought, why? How would it not count as an earthy palette? It's literally called Meadow. And I was like, yeah, it does. So you do have those kind of blue tones in here, the kind of red earthy, you know, dirt in here as well, while this one is more of those greens. But I just love the tone of greens in here. This quality is great, you guys. I always recommend these palettes if you're on a budget. All right, next we have a Juvias Place. This is the Nomad by Juvias. I think, other than the palettes that they've been coming out with that are newer, like the Afro Galactic palette or the Candy Shop palette that have duo and multi-chromes in there, out of these type of palettes that they came out with, I think this one is my favorite color story wise. I just think it is, you know, honestly, it reminds me a little bit of Natasha Denona, the Yucca palette, or the new Alter Ego Wildwood palette. It's that type of color story, that sort of sunflower, earthy, these kind of swampy greens. Love this color story. I think this is a really underrated palette. All right, so speaking of Yucca and Wildwood, here we have them right here. This is Shop Alter Ego, and then this is Natasha Denona. I have a video on both. I don't think I did a video on this, a dedicated video when it came out. I don't think, or maybe I did. Definitely did one for this. I also, I have 3 looks in that. The third look, I did use the similar shades from each palette. eye to eye where you really could not tell a difference. So I love both these palettes. I really, really do. I get more excited when I find an affordable palette that performs like a high-end palette. So that is why this palette by Alter Ego excites me more. I mean, that's why my name's Budget Beauty. It's why I brag about how cheap I find things. I just get a thrill out of it. So if you did not pick this up, I do highly, highly recommend it. If you passed on this one, but you felt FOMO, absolutely recommend this palette. It is so, so, so good. I do have a code. It's Budget Beauty. You don't have to use it, or you could save a couple of bucks. But yeah, both of these are great. Perfect earthy palettes. All right, next up, I do have the Micka Beauty UK-based brand Serpent palette. Now, quite a while back, I mentioned palettes that I skipped on, palettes that I purchased, or palettes I was thinking about purchasing. And I did say I was thinking about purchasing this palette, and some of you said you'd be really curious to hear my thoughts about it. I'll tell you a few of them here, but I think I'm gonna save most of my thoughts for like a roundup ranking of all the indie palettes I've tried in the last couple of months, maybe, because there's several that I've tried off camera and I can give you all my thoughts. But I decided, yes, this is earthy. I thought about it for a minute because I was like, well, there's purple, and this is tricky because see, like here it looks pretty earthy, but then like you turn it and it looks kind of like pink purple, and I'm like, well, but I mean I especially think these two rows are very, very earthy. This is sort of the outlier here, but there is a green, so I did decide to include this. So if you have it and you want to do an Earth Day look and you hadn't thought about this really being an earthy, I know everyone thought about it being more of like a grungy palette, but I see earthy grungy with some pops of purple. All right, next up we have two Nomad Cosmetics palettes. So we do have Okavango Safari, and then we have the America's Parks palette. Now the America's Parks, I also was like, is it? Because the tones in here aren't exactly what I think of for earthy, because they're a little bit, like, honestly, this is low key kind of a neutral rainbowy palette. I never really thought about it until I was really studying it. I've always just thought of it as a pretty like neutral palette, but it almost has like rainbow tones to the colors that are in this palette. But I thought it's close enough with the browns and the greens and like the yellow of the sun. I would go ahead and include it. This is, I believe, discontinued now. I'm pretty sure it's gone, but if you have it, just to remind you, Okavango, it's funny because you know, a lot of people compared this to Yucca because they came out almost at the same time. Now that I have Wildwood and I know how close that palette is to Yucca, I don't think Okavango is really that close to Yucca. Like, I think some people were deciding which one do I need. Yes, they are similar, but I don't think you'd be duping yourself if you had both, because I think this bottom row here is definitely different than Yucca because this is more, at least on me, more like gray smoky leaning. And then of course the greens and and these browns are very different from what is in Yucca as well, because you have more of like copper tones in here, like a penny. I always said the shimmer reminds me of a penny. So I love this palette so much. I kind of think that if I used it more and more, it might go up in my rankings of all my Nomad palettes. So yeah, I think this one's perfect to bust out. Next up we have from Wonder Beauty, the Trailblazer palette. And this is another one I kind of debated. I was like, would I call this an earthy palette? And I think only like the saving grace to call it earthy is because of these two greens right here, which happen to be my favorite shades in this palette. This shimmer is so delicious. I love it so, so, so much. But I think if you swatch, I'll just put these on my fingers. We'll just say these. These right here, I see that, and I definitely think an earthy look with these. You know, maybe the pink kind of throws it off a little bit, but I really, really enjoy this palette. The shimmers in here are definitely the star of the show, better than the mattes are, but the mattes are decent. But yeah, if you have this and you recently got it in your BoxyCharm and you're wanting to do an earthy look, then I think this one would be great. Next one, had to include this. It's literally got earth in the name. It is the Delancy Beauty Olive Earth palette. Now I do have a YouTube video on this one from a while back, and I was just blown away by this palette. I was not expecting it, just because it was very, very expensive. I think it's around $17. And since then, I mean, I really haven't, I know they came out these singles that do look really pretty. I think they're either multi or duochromes. They're very like shiny looking. So those kind of caught my eye, but none of their other palettes have ever appealed to me and still don't, but this one was just an outlier. It is stunning. It performs so well. The shimmers are beautiful. The tones in here are great. So you do kind of have that mix of swampy, you know, murky greens, but then you also have the bright greens that you'd find like summertime leaves and grass. So like, this is such a delicious palette. I really hope that they start coming out with interesting color stories like this. Okay, next up we have Melt palette. We have the Gemini 1 palette. Gemini 2, I got out and I was like, I don't really consider that earthy. Like, this, honestly, might be one that just encompasses, other than the Menagerie that does have the blue in it as well. This one is super earthy to me. Like, you can go grungy earth, you can go neutral, you can go olive tones, you can go a little bit warmer with these. This is, I'm trying to think if this is my favorite Melt palette. I talked myself out of a lot of Melt palettes. Like they recently have a new Smoke Sessions 2 or something. I kind of immediately was like, I don't need it, because my mentality lately, I've mentioned it before with my large collection and trying not to buy everything when it comes to eyeshadow palettes, is the thing that's coming out, is it more interesting and intriguing to me than my favorite color story of that brand? And here lately, I'm like, no. So like, this is one that I compare them to. I love this color story. It's got to be better than this one for me to get it. But yeah, this one is just hard to beat. This is the palette that is so hilarious to me that I would put my dog's life, I'm going to put my kid's life, dog lovers, I'm a dog lover, don't come after me, and put my dog's life on this, that I swear was meant to be a fall palette that got put in winter packaging. It is the Lunar Beauty 12 Days of Lunar palette that came out 2 winters ago. You cannot tell me this was not meant to be a fall palette. I will not believe you. I have my whole theory about he didn't get his products in time. He was panicking. He couldn't package it as fall because it had passed. So he put it in a winter palette, try to pass it off. It's ridiculous. So this was a fall palette. This was also a very earthy tone palette. I just absolutely, other than you cover up this purple, which also says this was like Halloween fall. Come on. Anyway, you cover this up. Again, like quintessential earthy palette here. It's sunflowers, it's dirt, it's greens. This is a really good palette, honestly. I just wish it had different packaging that wasn't phony. Okay, next up we have a Mora Beauty palette. This is the Time to Shine palette. And you guys, this is an excellent, excellent palette. Mora, I still say, is very underrated. I had a video where it was quite a while ago, but if you search it long enough, you will find it, where I gave a lot of my recommendations, and I have since fallen in love with like their multi-chrome liners or just their regular eyeliners. I use them almost every day, but their palettes, I just don't think get enough love, because the price of them are like drugstore prices. If you had a drugstore palette this big, it would probably be more expensive actually. The quality is excellent. I think this color story is beautiful. This screams earthy to me. Next we have a palette that I really should use more that is really, really good. That is the NYX Cosmetics Ultimate Utopia palette. Now this is a mega palette. It is huge. I'm not really so much into these palettes anymore. I definitely get it if you have maybe 3 palettes. I understand palettes to size. I think I never grab it just because it is so big, but now that I think about it, this would be an excellent palette to take on vacation, because you do have like cool kind of icy tones in here. And then you have all of these deeper neutrals with earthy. I decided to include this because most of these are pretty earthy. If you take this out, I think it just looks like a mega earthy palette. And then these kind of throw it off just a little bit, but this palette is good, you guys. It's just really, really big. Next, we have the Avocado Toast palette from BH Cosmetics. I know a lot of people really, really love this palette, this one and the Blueberry Muffin palette, but I do see earthy here. I mean, the tones, some of them are a little bit off, like the peachy tone, but I think definitely if you stick to kind of this diagonal right here, I see lots of earthiness in this palette. I keep talking about BH. It's just kind of sad at this point that we just don't have palettes from them like this anymore. But if you have it, don't forget about it for Earth Day. Then I have two from Sydney Grace. So we have the Tiny Marvels palette, the Mel Thompson palette. Really, the purple, take that out. Now we were talking with some earthiness. The purple's just a little bonus because it is a beautiful shade. I really, really love this palette. It's special to my heart. I find joy and just nostalgia and reminiscence whenever I use this palette. It's very, very beautiful on the eyes. I recommend all the time Sydney Grace for like if you're having pictures done, professional looks. I recommend it because it's just so consistent and easy to use. And then we have the Heaven to Earth palette, which has the sea turtles, adorable. And this one is that kind of quintessential earth water type of palette with the blues and then these really murky greens that just kind of remind me of like what would be under like in a lake is what this kind of reminds me. Even though we've got like a sea turtle, this kind of reminds me of like a lake and sky sort of palette. All right, Blend Bunny All Dolled Up. I didn't really ever think of this as an earthy palette until I was looking through all my palettes, like pulling out earthy palettes. And I was like, you know what? This is an earthy palette. I would call kind of like with the Adept Flying Fiddles where everyone called it neutral. And I'm like, it's kind of more of an earthy palette. Same thing with this one. I think everyone kind of called this a neutral palette and I see an earthy palette here. This is honestly kind of an under the radar palette from them, I think. I think this one is another really excellent travel palette. I have taken it before and pretty much got any look that I would want out of it, unless you're going for something tropical, but really, really love this one. Then we have the Muse palette by Cosmic Brushes. Again, one that I was like, am I cheating? But just take these purples out. And I absolutely just think this is it's earthy grunge with a couple of pops of purple is what I see here. Excellent. I think this is by far their best color story from Cosmic Brushes. Then we have the Nearly Neutral palette by Glaminatrix. I adore this palette so much, you guys. Like, I cannot say how much I love this palette. And I wish that they would just make this permanent, but I don't know if it's coming back or not. I say that and I'm like, is it gone? I'm pretty sure it's gone. Anyway, I love Glaminatrix and I love the tones in here. I recently used one of these shades on my very first makeup client for prom. I used a shade that was Sydney Grace, a Lunar Beauty, and then a shade from here. I used the shimmer Nearly Natural. So, so, so pretty on the eyes. I adore this one. And then the very last one is a Pat McGrath Mothership palette. It is the Subversive palette. And I do consider this an earthy palette. I typically don't include a lot of motherships in my categories. Like I don't feel like they often fit or they stand out enough to fit into say like, oh, most colorful palettes, most, you know, Valentine's palette. None of them really fit, but this one I pulled out and I started swatching each and I was like, oh yeah, this is definitely like grungy earthy here, deep smoky earthy. Love, love, love this green. This green makes this palette honestly more special than it probably is, but definitely one of my favorite motherships. That is it for all 24 of my earthy palettes. Leave it to me to be extra and have 24. I don't know how many Brittany will have. She is better about sticking to like 10 and I'm like let me just talk forever. If you guys are still here with the end, I really appreciate it. Like I said, be sure and go subscribe to Brittany if you're not, or just go watch her video, see which ones that she pulled out. Thank you, Brittany, for doing this with me. And as always, have fun shopping, budget shopping. Bye.